Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. We are getting through these winter months. We are going to thaw out, and on March the 6th, we're going to be down at Fadley's yet again. The new Fadley's, Lexington Market. By the way, if you've been over to Frederick Road, I was over at the Beaumont the other day. The Fishmonger's Daughter, which is the new Fadley's, all the facade is up, so I threw Damien a note. We will have the Magic 8-Ball Scratch also in the Maryland Lottery on March 6th. And we got a whole bunch of dates into March. There's another April date, April 2nd at Fadley's before a Red Sox game. We're also going to be at Coco's on April 30th. I've got guests lined up, Mark Vivian. People are hitting me back. So we're going to have great guests, great crab cake tour stops. And I think what feels like a never-ending thing now with this Justin Tucker situation. I'm wearing my purple Curio wellness shirt. Shout out to Far and Daughter and Wendy and Beck and everybody over there. Luke Jones joins me now. We usually are in Indianapolis. It's usually not 58 degrees in Indianapolis when we're there, dude. I mean, usually it's just not. I don't. How many did you do? 5, 6, 7, 8? I don't know. And I did a dozen combines. We broadcast from out there. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of investment, whatever. We didn't do it this week. And then when it boils down, really the access that the fans see in this giant hall in the stadium that is overrun with bloggers and college kids and people from the Midwest studying journalism. I don't know if they'll find any there, but firing questions at all of the general managers, scouts, coaches that come through the area and various media and whatever. I don't know if it's bigger or smaller. I do know that traditionally in the mind of Chad Steele and all of that of the NFL, this is the one time the general manager and head coach, you're going to have a little bit of access to them in the spring. You get 15 or 20 minutes and 2 more questions. And it's a gangbang of a whole billion people there asking dumb questions, smart questions, Justin Tucker questions 4 times, or not. But this is the only time that they take questions this time of year until we get to the Liars Luncheon, correct?
Exactly right. I mean, this is the first time we'd heard from Eric DeCosta or John Harbaugh since the season-ending press conference, which was just a few days before the Justin Tucker initial reporting from the Baltimore Banner came out. So, had been the initial statement from the team that they were aware of it, they were taking it seriously, and then silence for, I guess, 24 or 25 days since then, almost a month. So.
Oh, I
It
guess
was
to
about
my point, it was silence until they had to speak, which
sure,
is why this is a traditional thing. I want to make that clear that when
sure.
they do this thing in Indianapolis, that if you and I wanted to ask the Baltimore Ravens a question, you as a real media member and me as a deposed one, right? We have to get on a plane, fly out there, get it, at least in the morning and back tonight. So it's a $500 20-minute one question you might get. Maybe there's a scrum afterward. Although I think Chad Steele probably put both of them in a headlock and carted them sideways out so there could be no scrum because they have the biggest crisis management situation in the league right now with Justin Tucker, right? They got a Hall of Fame kicker who might or might not be a sexual predator. And they might or might not have known about it. And they might or might not have harbored it. And the NFL might or might not investigate it. There's a lot going on here. I mean, there really is for it being February 20 something. And we're going to get to Mark Andrews. We're going to get to Ronnie Stanley and all of that. But the Tucker thing sits over all of it, obviously.
It does, and it was asked about multiple times. The answers were very much what I expected, right? I mean, there were basically 2 plays here if you're an organization when something like this happens, right? The allegations come out, the initial reporting comes out, and you just say, we're done. We're washing our hands of it right now, right? And if the Ravens had released Justin Tucker on January 30th or January 31st, that would have been your answer, that's the direction they were going. Clearly, they did not, so you wait for it to play out. And especially knowing now that the NFL is indeed in the midst of an investigation. Eric DeCosta confirmed in his session with the media in Indianapolis that he's talked to NFL league people, investigators, and investigators plan to continue to talk to people in the Baltimore area. We don't know the timeline for that,
You know, the
but
funniest thing about that is if I called them right now and I know all of them at the NFL and told them that I had information, would they even call me?
um,
Interesting, huh? Because I have information. I mean, I have information. You know what I mean? If they were to
well,
call
then
me,
reach out to them,
yeah,
I
right. I
suppose,
mean,
right?
I have information about the Ravens, about their front office, and about I have information. I do. I have information the NFL will want to know about a cover up. So if they want to call me, they should call me, right? Shouldn't they talk to me if they're looking? I mean, seriously, I'm
Well,
not
but
even
what?
being coy.
Well, then reach out to them then.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean,
I'd be
they
very
can't just
interested to
know it.
see
They
what
just can't
their
know it out of thin
investigation
air.
is. I mean, I could put them on to a half dozen people to talk to, like literally. I mean, like literally, 100%. Really, I could. So I want to say that on my FCC airwaves to anybody out there. If anybody knows who the real NFL investigators are, and there really is an investigation, tell them to call me because I have some things I could point them in the right direction. I have some information. If it were an FBI investigation, I well, maybe not now, given who this clown that's running the country, but in a normal if we had a normal society, if the FBI was in investigating something, I'd have to talk to them, wouldn't they? If they call, if I said I had information, they'd be fools to not listen to me, right? So that's where this NFL investigation, I've seen their investigations. I've seen the oral reports that were given on Dan Snyder and John Gruden and Colin Cat. I mean, like that gives me. I'm just saying, if that's the answer, if the answer is the NFL's here, they'll get to the bottom of it. If that's Eric DeCosta's answer, ah, I mean, come on, man. I mean, that's ludicrous that the NFL is going to investigate this and do what? Find what? Cover up whatever they find. That's been the history.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and stick
I'm
up for the
saying no
league,
lies,
but
right? I mean, literally, right?
I
Deflategate
mean,
was an oral report. After all of that, he was guilty, and like there's never any trophies are there, rings are there, Bill Belichick's girlfriend's there.
Tom
It's
Brady was
there.
suspended. I mean, if
Yeah.
you really, I mean, I think you're insane if you think
No,
Deflategate should go to the degree that they should be stripped of Super Bowl trophies and stuff like that.
I think
But
it's a serious thing to cheat, and I think it's a
sure.
serious thing to
And
lie, and
Tom
I think
Brady
it's a
was
serious
suspended,
thing.
right?
I think all of this is serious stuff, and they need better
Sure.
police than the police they have. That's all. If the police are, the NFL is going to come
Fair
in
enough.
and figure out if Justin Tucker is a sexual predator, then I don't I get different cops.
Okay.
Yeah, get cops not hired by the NFL. Period.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not,
it.
look,
Yeah,
I'm not going to sit here and fly the NFL
I don't like
flag.
the answer. That's all I'm saying. I don't like the answer.
I mean, what answer did you want at this point in time, knowing that,
Well,
and
I expect him to kind of cut him, right? I mean,
okay, well, but they didn't do that on January 31st. So, of course, that was their message delivering they were going to let this play out and with whatever the investigation uncovers, right? Whether in some way
if
it
the
exonerates them
investigation
or
uncovers that Eric DeCosta and his wife knew about this, or John Harbaugh and his wife knew about this, or Steve or Dick Cass or Kevin Byrne, let's go backwards. This is 10 years ago. Like, if any of these people really knew about it or somebody called, I'm telling you right now, dude, I've had so many people reach out to me that are credible, incredible people in some ways, knew the spa owners, I mean, like, and I didn't know anything about it. But if I would have, I took them all sorts of information, Luke. I took them information about employees of theirs that they should have had in rehab, and they didn't. I mean, they did. I mean, I'm just being honest with
I'm
you.
not arguing with
Like,
you. Like
you
I'm
know,
not
I'm
saying I
honest.
disagree.
You know what I mean? These are not people of integrity. They're people of football and gambling and fourth down and tough guy and bully. I mean, what I wrote about Harbaugh is like that is the Harbaugh thing. Nothing happened. You didn't see it. Fight me. You know what I mean? That's who they are. And nothing happened. There is Justin's a great guy. Nothing until we hear, and then we'll figure out what to do about it. And the Ray Rice thing still bubbles up that nobody lost their job but Ray Rice. I keep saying that, and then they bring him back as the hero of the game, and he's coaching now. That was just a penalty box. That wasn't. That wasn't. I mean, and that's cool. And I always liked Ray Rice, so I never
Well, I mean, I would push back and say that Ray Rice, that
Did
Doesn't
his
mean he should
time.
be, shouldn't mean
Yeah.
that he should be disqualified from society for the rest of his life.
I
Now,
don't disagree with that.
sure,
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I'm happy
Look,
he's
I
coaching.
mean,
I always
I
like Ray. I haven't seen Ray in 10 years. I have no, Ray did his time, and he and his wife, if they've figured things out, I mean, I don't,
sure,
I'm a second chance guy, but I'm
sure,
also serial liar guy. And I'm also
you know,
bad integrity, bad integrity. Once it becomes a game of whack-a-mole, that whole place is festering. And people reach to me every day, Luke. Credible people every day reach to me with information that it, it I have my own situation that I have made public, that everyone that hears my voice, love me, hate me, whatever. I am a media member, and you need me in there for that purpose. You need me in there that when I hear things or know things, and I take them to people like Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh and Dick Cass, and nothing was done about it. As a matter of fact, every time I went to them, they made it worse on me, and that is not something under me and the media. They've done that to their own employees. So I don't. I don't speak for them. I'm not allowed to speak to them. I'm not allowed to ask questions of them. That unto itself is its own abomination that we're watching on video these questions asked. And DeCosta's like, well, I've answered that 4 times. Well, answer it 4 more, dude. We got 20 minutes with you. You do this 4 times a year. You run from me on verandas out in public. So like I don't, the accountability here does not match up with they don't walk their talk. They don't talk their walk. And that's getting real obvious. And then we'll get to the football and all of that. But women are watching this. Women,
sure.
people with sisters and nieces and mothers, people who've had legitimate massages. And I think that in any massage I've ever been in, if I tried hanky panky, I just think they probably would have kicked my ass in the Chinese spa up in New York. I mean, just like I like literally some dude would have come out and thrown me out the back door. Like I just don't. It's so if to do it one time to one woman in one place is so unthinkably uncool. Um, that John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, who have daughters and wives, should bristle at it. That's all I'm saying. And it's been 26 days. They either know or they don't know. He's either innocent or he's not. Whatever. If he's innocent, God bless him. Let the NFL come in. But it doesn't smell good. That's all. None of this
I
smells good.
mean, of course not. It's the last thing you want when you're talking about your organization with any allegations of this nature, and especially the timeline and questions about when and if you heard any scuttlebutt whispers about it, anything. I mean, you and I have talked about that. I mean, obviously, the day that the initial report came out, I mean, it took people about 5 minutes to find tweets going all the way back 4 years ago that were at least, and again, random tweets from anonymous users, right? But tweets referencing Justin Tucker with some semblance of misbehavior pertaining to massage therapists, right? I mean, regardless of it being from someone random on Twitter or X, the fact that it was 4 years ago, that's a heck of a coincidence if there's no smoke there, right? So
Well, it's piling up. The Steve Smith thing over the
sure,
weekend, embarrassing, believable, credible, whatever it is, it's embarrassing. And just on and on. And then the Ray Rice thing just bubbling back up, embarrassing. NFL
sure,
investigating anything is its own double embarrassment for all of them. The fact that these media organizations that are in business with them don't even have it on their websites. Like, it's just down the line, it's
right.
checking all the boxes of being an animal house out there. Like, literally, it is. Not to mention the phone calls that I've been getting this week. So, I there is no investigation of this by the media other than the Baltimore Banner, and they had to put millions of dollars of lawyers out in front of this in order to report it, right? So there's a real misbalance going on here, and I know I don't want to accuse you of this, but there will be a point where you will say, let's just talk about Ronnie Stanley and Mark Andrews. I mean, dude, I'm a football, it's the draft, it's the free. Let's just talk about who's going to play, and we will. I
Sure.
promise. That's what we do. And I don't want to talk about this. I want my press credential back. I want to be in Indianapolis with you right now, eating bean dip and with Rex Ryan and Jim Schwartz and talking ball and talking like that's what I That's why I got into this. I didn't get into this to be the guy with the FCC license working his whole life to sit here, be thrown out, muck raked, have every person who's ever been wronged by them reach to me and tell me what an animal house it is. And I'm not the dude here with the notebook taking notes saying, I wonder if it's believable. Oh, you've met Chad Steele. Oh, Sashi Brown. Oh, yeah, you're like, and I go down the list and I start to, I've told Harbaugh this privately and publicly. I call them integrity free. That's what my wife calls them. They're an integrity free organization. And that breaks my heart. I mean, I invested in them for 26 years. I bought PSLs. I lived through Ray Lewis, Jamal Lewis, who did the show last month. I've lived through all of it, right? They've had linebackers dropping dead in the offseason, nothing, not a word. Like they've just had stuff happen that they're not a front facing organization. And when I asked them, like I said this to my wife earlier, like if I'm in Indianapolis and asking questions, you and I get in a plane, we fly out, we do all that song and dance, we pick up our credentials, we go, we're there 20 minutes, whisked out the back door. We get one half a question about a scandal, about an absolute scandal that they have to deal with. And that even if we were like, yeah, I could have sent you out there. I don't even know what the benefit is of asking dishonest people questions. I'm trying to figure that out as a human, as a 56-year-old, as a media member, as someone that asks questions of people all day, every day in a very mixed audience. I don't know the value of asking crooked people questions. You know what I mean? It reminded me watching Harbaugh and DeCosta on this screen that I'm broadcasting on 20 minutes ago, watching their eyes shift, watching their pre-prepared thing. I just, it sickens me. I just want to say that because I don't say it a lot. I don't say it often enough. Everybody thinks I say it all day, every day. I don't, but this is sickening. It's sickening. And the fact that Pashadi's off on a boat hiding is sickening. The fact that Sashi Brown hasn't answered anything and hides, sickening. And then they come out of their shell for 18 minutes, 600 miles from here, in front of two local reporters, brush off the questions, and then go do football for a while. And we sit here and talk about it. And we'll get to the football because they did say something, you think, on the football side? I mean,
And we'll get to that. I just want to clarify something I said a few minutes ago. Just looking at it from the standpoint of, to me, there were basically two ways to approach this when the story comes out, right? You either cut them immediately, and I'm not saying that would have been the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. It's just that clearly would have been one option, in the way that if this story had come out about the 52nd player on the roster, he would have been gone 5 minutes before it came out, right? So there's that. But if you don't go that route, then I wasn't surprised to hear what I heard on Tuesday. I wasn't surprised to hear them say, we're letting the NFL investigation play out, because that's clearly what they're doing. They also made it very clear, both Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh, that they're evaluating kickers in the draft, with Eric DeCosta going as far as saying Randy Brown's going to be going all around the country, which they probably would have been doing anyway with Justin Tucker coming off the worst year of his career. But, if you're asking me,
if the Tucker scandal doesn't happen, that would be the question today, right? There would be arguing.
It wouldn't have been the first question, but it would have been a question.
And they would have to say, well, we still love Tuck, or Tuck's still under contract, is what they would say, right?
Sure. But it was going to be part of what they do, in the same way that they were ready. They were looking into drafting Lamar Jackson when Joe Flacco was still their starting quarterback at that point.
What is different than Deshaun Watson, where Houston, he was their franchise quarterback, and like, they were going to lose a quarterback as well as a predator and all of that other stuff that they had to figure all. And they came out smelling like a rose as an organization, by the way. They defumigated that relatively as best they could. I don't know how.
Keep in mind, he wanted out from there as well. I mean, that was, the timeline of that was so bizarre, because remember, he was sitting out in Houston. And I can't remember exactly when the first accusations came out on him, but that happened over a pretty extensive
I
period of
think my
time.
point is he had value.
Oh,
They
sure.
got something back for him and all of that. It wasn't just cut the bridge and run on a
Right.
35-year-old kicker who had yips. You know what I mean? Like that's a different place than an ascending quarterback who has out of pocket ability, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So, and I don't just mean on a price tag. I
sure.
just mean on a they could have just cut him and said he's 35, as I predicted they would. I'm shocked that they haven't, quite frankly. And that may speak to their level of guilt or involvement one way or
Maybe.
another because they're managing all of that. They're not managing it, they're hyper managing it. Every word is pursed. Everything that they came to the podium with was
Mhm.
rehearsed in Baltimore, in Indianapolis, on the airplane, in the interview room, because that's how sensitive this thing is this week for them.
Sure. No question. No question. But just to finish my point that I was alluding to, I expected to hear what we heard today. And I'm not, that's not a judgment or that it's the right way to go or that they're handling this well or anything like that. It's just that's what I expected to hear. And in the meantime, I'm guessing they're preparing to move on from him. And when is that drop dead date? I don't know if it's when they draft a kicker in the fifth round on the Saturday of the draft. I don't know if it's when potential more additional allegations come out. I mean, as we kind of said, it started with six and it's up to 16 now. We kind of said at that point, what's the inflection point here where you just say, you know,
Well, they're not
again,
fumigating it. If two more Friday, and then there's a report, they're not doing their best to run from it. I'll
yeah,
say that. Like, and maybe the lawyers told them they shouldn't.
I mean, who knows? Right.
Like I don't know. This is being lawyered up behind lawyer doors
Oh,
too.
there's
So
lawyers for everyone, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, no doubt.
So there's all of that going on as well. But their front facing part of this and their role in this remains to be seen. And I
Sure,
am unimpressed with an investigation by the National Football League. Matter of fact,
fair enough.
I couldn't be less impressed. If Elon Musk was investigating Donald Trump, I would be less impressed. Like there is no, send real cops or you're not taking this seriously.
Well, and you also go back to these allegations are from some of them well over a decade ago. I mean, that complicates whoever is investigating, that complicates efforts to really try to get the most complete picture that you can. And that's not me saying that the allegations are
No, no,
untrue,
the
far from
NFL
it.
could spend $500,000 right now, bring in two private eyes for 6 weeks, 3 weeks, and
I'm not saying you couldn't do that.
talk to people in Baltimore and have a report.
I'm not saying
Like
you can't
real
do that, but
people,
I'm saying,
not
but anytime you have a timeline that goes back that far, there's always going to be challenges to that compared to something that happened last week
well, this
because
isn't
we
a litigious case because of the
sure
statute of limitations.
right
That's
right
it, right?
exactly
Yeah.
exactly so and look I'm not going to sit here and stand up for the NFL or its investigating prowess or lack thereof. Of course not. But
I can't stand
my
up for any of them. That's the
but my
worst part.
overall but my overall point that again that I was trying to make was there were basically two approaches that the Ravens were going to have all along with this. It was either to cut ties immediately, or you were going to let whatever investigating was going to happen play out, and then you make a decision one way or the other, right? And understanding that the waiting and every step along the way leaves you open for PR backlash and criticism and and everything that we've talked about from January 30th until the present date. So, I wasn't shocked by anything I heard. I think the tone was, about what I expected to hear from the standpoint of, if you're asking me to one way or the other, my prediction, it sounded like two individuals preparing to move on from their seven-time Pro Bowl kicker, who's the longest tenured player presently, at least for now in the organization, and someone who, as we've talked about, was on his way to having Hall of Fame credentials, and now who knows what the heck's going to happen with Justin Tucker's career, his livelihood, all of that, right? And I'm not saying that to be sympathetic towards him whatsoever, but it's clearly a very uncomfortable story that begins with 16 women who have made allegations of this kind of gross behavior. And, you never want to hear about anything like that. You never want anyone to be subjected to something like that. So that alone makes it very, very serious, very, very uncomfortable. And the Ravens have elected to proceed in this fashion rather than, like I said, they could have cut ties. They even had a football alibi to justify it because he had had such a poor season. But they aren't doing it that way, and we're going to see how it plays out. But understanding that's the approach they were taking because they hadn't made a move to this point. What we heard in Indianapolis, like I said, not saying it was the right or wrong or anything like that, just saying I wasn't surprised hearing the comments that we ultimately heard.
He's Luke Jones. He's Baltimore Luke. All right, off the Tucker thing and onto the football field thing. Ronnie Stanley and Mark Andrews. And you and I talked at length about Mark Andrews.
Yeah,
And it's the first time we kind of, because the Tucker thing's been on fire. We're talking
sure.
baseball and there's other things going on. But, and I hadn't thought about, I said this early in the week, I hadn't thought about Mark Andrews being, that drop was going to be the end and him going out the side door in Buffalo and how they would feel about Isaiah Likely and the draft and his money and his cap number and where he fits in the offense and bringing him back and all of that. You, better than I, are better at parsing the verbiage of Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh in their, especially DeCosta, is very limited amount of time out in front of me. I remember when Eric DeCosta used to come over and have coffee with me at the house, and we just would sit and talk, and I'd know what's going on. Like those days are over with in regard to anything that they're doing at this point. But you're as good as anyone. What are the tea leaves? If you had to predict right now, it certainly felt like they had some confidence with Stanley, and it
Yeah.
felt like the Mark Andrews thing, maybe not as much so.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, first of all, I mean, DeCosta and John Harbaugh typically is going to express more optimism, right? I mean, he's ultimately not at the negotiating table, even though most of this stuff is done over the phone and via text. We know that. But with DeCosta, he very much expressed confidence in the Ravens trying to get something done. I mean, his exact quote on Ronnie Stanley, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to get a deal done. Now, doesn't mean 100%. Doesn't, there's also a negotiating tactic to doing that because then you immediately put the player and the agent on the defensive, right? You express optimism that there's a deal, and if there isn't, then you're automatically, that's painting the other side as the bad guy because you can say, hey, we tried, we were optimistic, right? Regardless of what the dollars are going to be. We've already talked about it. There isn't a whole lot out there on the free agent market from a tackle standpoint. And when you're talking about teams like the Patriots or even the Kansas City Chiefs, even though the Chiefs don't have cap room to necessarily go out and make a move like that. But, Ronnie Stanley's, if he does in fact hit the market, there's going to be some demand for him. And that's why I've said it complicates your efforts to try to get a deal done here. I don't think this is going to be a case where he's getting another 9-figure contract. Far from it, but
What is it?
what is the price
21
point?
million is the number been floating around, right? The
I
cap
mean,
went up,
yeah,
right? They don't want to go into the market and try to find a left tackle. So it's now probably about 3 years, 60 million, but not really. 2 years front loaded with a lot of
yeah. I mean,
money.
what's the
Like,
guarantee, right? I mean,
if
what's the
they get
signing
stuck with
bonus?
him, they're going to get stuck with an $18 million tackle next year, and they're going to have some
Yeah,
dead money. And I don't know, dude. Harbaugh and DeCosta might be getting to the point, especially with this owner and Lamar, where going all in and having to get to at least a Super Bowl to save their own asses at some point. And I don't know that it ever gets to that point. I mean, Bisciotti will never fire them. I mean, they must all have pictures on each other. I mean, I don't, that won't happen. So I don't know what, but I do think that like they can play more games with the cap as the cap goes further north and they have a $50 million quarterback to maybe kick the can a little further than maybe Steve had been willing to do the first 15 years to try to squeeze something out of the next 2 or 3 years to say we're not going back to the drawing board for a left tackle and we're going to
yeah,
play with the tight end we have under contract because like we're just not going to eat dead money and we think he can still play because they think Mark Andrews can play. I don't think that's the question. But they're like every other team. They're going to have a cap issue if they have a $20 million tackle and a $50 million quarterback, right? I mean,
Well, it's not a cap issue. It becomes a cap issue if your $20 million left tackle goes back to not being available like he was for the better part of 3 or 4 years, right? I mean, he's coming off of a year where he was very healthy. I mean, kudos to Ronnie Stanley. He took a pay cut last year, and I don't want to say bet on himself because he took the pay cut, right? I mean, betting on himself would have said kick rocks. I'll go to the market and I'll go sign a 1 year deal with somebody and do it that way. But he worked with them. He did everything that the Ravens wanted to see him do in terms of being healthy. Was he playing at an all-pro level for all 17 games? Probably not, but he was really solid. And that's
well, this is
that's
the point where you find that they love him. They
well this
love him, right? They drafted him. They gave him a boatload of money. He got hurt. They loved him. They loved him more. Got him to a championship game. Love him more. Like this third time. I mean, they love him. So and he's one of their
sure.
guys, right? Yeah.
I mean, they didn't love that he got hurt. I mean, they didn't love him enough last year to just let him play at what his original cap number was going to be. But yeah, of course they'd like to continue this, but what's the price point, right? You don't want to be in a position where you're finally out from what was a really tough contract to endure because he got hurt 2 days after he signed it. So for me, it's very much a case of you don't want to jump back into that too aggressively because he is going to be 31 years old and he does have the injury history he has. However, you have a championship caliber roster, regardless of what's happened in the divisional round in the AFC title game the last 2 years. But you don't want to be in a position where, okay, you lose them, you let them walk. What's next? Can Roger Rosengarten actually play left tackle? Or do you think he can play left tackle? And then you find out, oh, that's not good. And now we have a problem at left tackle, and we've got to replace Rosengarten at right tackle. So, or you draft someone, and that individual's not ready because you're picking late in the first round. And even if you try to trade up, someone's not always ready to be. I mean, Jonathan Ogden was picked fourth overall. Go look at the last 10 years, the number of left tackles taken in the top 5 or the top 10 who still have some growing pains, their first couple years, or don't even pan out. So the point is with Ronnie Stanley, as much as you want to take some pause and acknowledge the history with injuries, his age, understanding that generally hurt guys don't suddenly become unhurt guys as they get older. But at the same time, you lose them. Wow, you've really lowered the floor of what left tackle could end up being for you, understanding what that can mean in keeping your left tackle or keeping your franchise quarterback upright and healthy and keeping your offense operating at a high level. So that's what they're trying to figure out. That said, DeCosta and Harbaugh both being very expressing quite a bit of optimism does tell me that I think they feel good about their chances about re-signing him. But as you know, Nestor, until the ink is dry on the contract, you don't really know. I think on the flip side, transitioning to Mark Andrews, I think Eric DeCosta was very complimentary in what he had to say about Mark Andrews. I think he was very, very glowing in his praise, but he was also very non-committal in how he spoke about Andrews in terms of his status with the Baltimore Ravens for the 2025 season, right? I mean, I'll read you the quote because I tweeted it out as the video hit social media. Mark's going to go down as one of our great players. He'll be in the Ring of Honor one day. I love having Mark on the team. He's an awesome player. I know he's going to have an amazing season. We'll figure out all the roster machinations over the coming weeks. At no point in that statement, as glowing as it was, do you hear anything about, we think he's going to have a great season for us. We think he's going to win us a bunch of games this year as he has every year. So that to me right there, that almost sounded like something you say when a player's, retiring or he left or anything like that. And I'm not saying Mark Andrews retiring. I'm just saying that it very much sounded to me like either a preemptive goodbye or leaving enough ambiguity in there to what? Try to see if you can get some of these 31 other teams to pick up the phone and say, hey, what's the deal with Andrews and what's the deal with Likely? They're both free agents after this year. We know you guys don't have a lot of cap space. Mark's got, $11 million coming his way in the 2025 season under his current deal. what's going to take to part with him? Would you be interested in a fourth round pick? Would you be interested in a swap of third round picks or whatever? Again, I'm
To
spitballing
the
here.
right team, he would get 80 balls.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Andrews was still very. I mean, he caught 11 touchdowns even after a nothing of a first quarter of the season for him, where we were all asking like, what's going on with Mark Andrews? I mean,
We
he's
had
still
that
put up.
car accident, right? That was
Well,
serious.
he
Yeah.
had that. I mean, keep in mind, he was still coming back from the ankle injury last year, which I know he made it back for the playoffs last year. He wasn't anywhere close to 100%. So he's been through a lot physically over the last year. But again, that statement to me, I'm not going to go as far as saying I think that means they could potentially cut him if they don't get any trade action. But part of that is I also think someone out there would trade for Mark Andrews because of what you just said. I mean, he's still a good player. I know people are angry and frustrated still about what happened in the Buffalo game. I understand that, but you can't let that completely wipe away your entire perception of who the player has been, even in the present, even in 2024, what he was. So to me, that I very much took those comments as we're open for business if you want to try to come get Mark Andrews. Because again, I think you look at it pragmatically. You're talking about someone who's going to be 30, the ankle injury and all that. A guy that has played through a lot of nagging things over the years too. How long is he going to hold up? For every Travis Kelce that plays into his mid to late 30s, think how many tight ends get to age 30 and the wear and tear. It's just it's tough. So, from that standpoint, you acknowledge that Isaiah Likely's 4.5 years younger and also entering the last year of his rookie deal. If you're just going to wager, if you're going to bet who's going to be the more productive player over the next 4 years, you're easily going to say Isaiah Likely. Now, the price point is different because they're at different points in their careers. But I think if you're the Ravens, if you can only have one or the other for the next 3 or 4 years, I mean, is it even close? I think it's Isaiah Likely just because he's going to be 26 rather than 30. And, just understanding how players generally age, right? And understanding you're certainly not going to be able to keep both of them on multi-year deals. So that doesn't mean you cut Andrews. It doesn't mean you're definitely trading him. But I think looking at it through the lens of not just 2025, but the big picture, I think you're trying to work something out with Likely. And if that means that you move on from Mark Andrews on the right deal right now, or obviously in the next few weeks, leading into the draft, then that's what you do. So
Well,
I
there's
very, of
big money on a couple of guys, and then there's Kyle Hamilton and Linderbaum too.
course,
So to
right.
me, all of this puzzle is keeping dead money off. I've said we'll be really generous with Ronnie Stanley, and you're like, no, they've already been generous with Ronnie
I mean,
Stanley.
you
They
have
just
to
need to get a deal
consider it.
done, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and across the way, the worst money they've spent in recent times has been on the safety position, whether it was Marcus Williams or whether it was
Earl
Earl
Thomas,
Thomas. I
or
mean,
even Tony Jefferson, who was a great guy and they loved, but never played at the level of what that original contract was. Yeah, I mean, it's Weddle was the only one, and even they cut the final year of that deal.
see, that was the
So
thing. Like they would never give wide receivers money like that
yeah,
because a lot of the wide receivers that would get the market were head cases. Calvin Johnson, Andre John, those guys never got to market. But the guys that went to market, they didn't want to give 40, 60, 80 million dollars to, but safeties were something that they bought, off the shelf a little bit more. Roquan is also, a guy they dealt for.
yeah,
I just keep looking at their own guys and saying Hamilton, Linderbaum will be the highest paid center in the league when he signs his deal. And Hamilton, I don't know what the safety, the hybrid, where it is and whatever, but
I'd be shocked if he's not the.
he's a $30 million player right now
I
playing
would
for
bet
$4
more
million
on
bucks,
Hamilton.
right? Like
I
literally,
would
right?
bet more on Hamilton becoming the highest paid safety than Linderbaum becoming the highest paid center, even though that both could end up being there. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So yeah, I mean,
But that makes Linderbaum a $20 million center, $15 million center.
sure. I mean,
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now,
yeah. I
I mean,
mean,
I
and it
could
makes Hamilton a $32 million safety right now. So I just these numbers get a little by the way, Ronnie Stanley's made $108 million playing for the Ravens, and that sounds about right. He's been here a long time. He was a top
Yeah,
draft pick. He got the $98 million deal that he's now cashed all the way in, and another year, and now about to maybe add 20 to 40 million more of real money if he hits the field the next 2 years. I mean, these guys are making a lot of money
sure.
for throwing media members out and not answering questions and running out the side door and having hokey pokey and massage parlors and just all of it. It's a mind-boggling amount of money that we're talking about, and this salary cap going upward of $300 million in the coming years. But what the best players cost, even when you're a genius like Eric DeCosta and you hit on these guys and you get the best players, and that's great. But every Lamar Jackson is going to cost you every Hollywood Brown, or for everyone that you hit on, you're going to
You
have
got to pay
another
them.
one that you can't pay them. You can't
Yeah,
pay 'em.
yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt, no doubt. And look, I mean that's a good problem to have, rather than part of you mentioned the safety position. Remember, the fallout from that was whiffing on Matt Elam, whiffing on Terrence Brooks. Like they had a series of safeties where that didn't work out very well, to the point where they're like, we got to go get Eric Weddle, right? I mean, because safety had been such a problem for them for the better part of 4 or 5 years after Ed Reed had left, right? I mean, after Ed
They've
had
been so
gotten
good at
old.
that, though. I mean, if there's
Yeah, I mean,
anything,
like,
if I
look,
write the
everyone's
good
going to
book
have,
on them, it's
you're
bringing
always
in
going to
the
have some
Chris Canties,
misses.
bringing in the Calais Campbells, bringing in the Kyle Van Noys, bringing in the Clowney. I mean, they have taken that Belichick model in New England and bringing in veteran players, and they missed on Earl Thomas, right?
Sure, you're
But they hit
everyone
on Weddle,
misses.
you
Everyone
know?
misses, right?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I've always, because I'll see, even people in my life who are Ravens fans who I'd like to think, or not like to think, because that sounds kind of, I retract that. Who do know things, who are smart football fans, but I see criticisms of drafts sometimes, and it's like, if you're going to evaluate a team as as a drafting organization, you got to look at the 31 other teams, right? No one bats 1,000. No one bats 800. So look at what their percentage is compared to the other 31 teams, and then you start to get a picture of just how good they are at doing that. But to your point, to bring it back to talking about these contracts and where they're going with Linderbaum, with Kyle Hamilton, they're in a position where they've really hit big time on some of these recent picks. Not all of them, but they've hit big on those two. Right now, just to give you an idea, Antoine Winfield, highest paid safety in the NFL for Tampa Bay, average annual value of $21 million. I mean, Kyle Hamilton is absolutely going to get more than a 4-year, $84 million contract. I mean, I don't know how much more, but it's going to be more. And with the center position, Creed Humphrey, the Chiefs star center, he's at 4 years, $72 million. Now, they really, they really blew the market out of the water for centers there, because the next highest was Frank Ragnow of the Lions, and his AAV was only 13.5. So that's where I say I don't know if Linderbaum will exceed Humphrey, but you better believe he's going to be very close.
I
He's going
called
to be
him
in
a
that
$20 million
neighborhood.
dollars center. He's a $15 million center.
I mean, whether it's 15, whether it's 16, it might be 17, it might be 17.5, right? I mean, one thing the Ravens have actually done that has actually kept some of their average annual values in check is they've been good about giving up a little more upfront immediate money to players, a little more in terms of guarantees in the first couple years, which is really what most of these players really want, right? You can sign a 10-year deal that sounds incredible from an average annual value standpoint, but when you sign a 10-year deal, you're only getting a, a fraction of that, right? You're not getting all that money. So a lot of times it has to do with what does the player, what tickles the player's fancy, what makes the agent's chest puff out in terms of, hey, look at what I just did, and then they can brag to their other clients and go to other teams and negotiate. So it's very nuanced, but again, the big point is with the Ravens, and that's why it's tough right now with Ronnie Stanley and with Mark Andrews. Two guys who when they've been healthy and on the field, have been really, really, really good players for them. Especially Andrews, with Stanley, with having some of his injuries. But you get to a point where you've got to be thinking about the next wave of players that are going to fit that category for you. I mean, it's not just Kyle Hamilton. It's not just Tyler Linderbaum. Not that it's immediate, but Zay Flowers just became the first wide receiver drafted by the Ravens to make a Pro Bowl,
I was going to
right?
say he's another guy that's up for 25
I
million
mean, I don't know if
soon.
they're going to give it to him, but he's going to be like, you're going to have to consider what you're doing there, right? So, I mean, that's just how this works. I mean, they had to pay Matabike this past offseason, right? And he became, he got Haloti Nada money, obviously way different than when Nada signed 15 years ago, but the point stands. So,
They
the
better
good,
hope they get another corner they have to pay at some point.
yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they draft a corner, even after Wiggins, because, Marlon Humphrey's more of a nickel, more of a slot corner, right? And what's going to happen with him? Are you going to extend him? Try to tack a couple more years on his deal
I
because
agree
his
wholeheartedly, by the way, with that sentiment. Like if somebody were to ask me right now if I have to bet $1 on what position they're going to draft, I think they'll draft a corner
I mean, I
because
don't
I
know if
think
it's
that
that, but
they
it
they
could
can
be.
they can never have enough.
Yeah, it could be, right? I mean, I think you do look at it through the lens of, Nate Wiggins, you just drafted. Marlon's coming off of maybe the best year of his career, so he's kind of righted the ship in terms of his standing with the organization. Although you probably want to do something with that contract then if you're going to, keep him for 2 more years. You might tack on a year or two to try to smooth out the cap numbers, but you can never have enough of that, right? I still think edge rusher. This seems to be a pretty good draft in terms of edge rushers. I think they need to keep taking swings there because Van Noy's another year older, always in a contract year. Are you going to extend him? He's coming off of a double-digit sack season. I'm not saying he's Terrell Suggs in his prime, but he's still better than most of what you've drafted over the last decade in that regard. So,
Let me give you another position, guard, because they're picking late in the first round. If
yeah,
the best guard is there and they feel like they have a 5-year guy that would help them if they can't afford Linderbaum. If
yeah,
that offensive line with this quarterback is paramount. They got the fat running back that I screamed about for 3 years, the way you screamed for a decade about their secondary and their wide receivers. I mean, if this is the offseason of anything for me, sign me up for another Marshall Yanda or another Nate Wiggins. And I mean Nate Wiggins in that
that's
way,
fine.
the best way, just another dart at having somebody to run around in the secondary because that's the game. That's especially if you're going to keep Hamilton around and Roquan's going to be in his prime. You've invested in these other places. To me, guard, maybe left tackle, right? I mean, if
Right. I
there's
mean,
a tackle there at the
there's
end
a
of the
big,
first round you like,
yeah,
go have at it. But I think offensive line, and I say that meaning guard in my mind, or corner or guard in the second and third round and thinking you get another Rosengard and kind of plug and sort of kind of play guard. I I feel like they're strong in a lot of other places.
yeah. I mean,
I don't feel
I
like
think
they need things. I mean, we don't talk about it much in these off seasons because they're good. And they certainly aren't going to be splashy and free. They're not going to give money to a free agent guard. They didn't even
yeah.
sign their own guy last year, right? Slightly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, look, we can go down the positions real quick. Quarterback, they're good. Running back, they're good. Wide receiver, they need a depth piece or two, but Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman both coming off career years. You're in a good spot there. Tight end, we don't know what's going to happen with Mark Andrews, but you still have Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler. All three of them are under contract, so good, right? Offensive line, you just said it. I mean, it has to be a special guard, right? It can't just be someone that's just solid, right? If it's a guy that you think has a chance to be Marshall Yanda, or how about Ben Grubbs, who made a couple Pro Bowls in his career, then great. But that's what you're looking at. Left tackle. What happens with Ronnie Stanley? Or okay, if it's not a left tackle and you think Rosengarten can actually do that, then you need a right tackle, right? So offensive line is the big position on the offensive side of the ball. That's obvious, right? We can talk about drafting for depth. Like I said, a number 3, number 4 wide receiver, that you're not targeting that guy in the first round, obviously. So on the defensive side, that's where I think it's a little more interesting. I already mentioned edge rusher. You mentioned outside corner. Safety is a possibility, right? Does it need to be a first round safety? No, but I think you're still looking at that spot. Inside linebacker, to me, Trenton Simpson's he's got to do the job next year. That's going to be a problem if he has to get benched again, right? You can't invest another early pick at an inside linebacker spot that already you're paying a guy $20 million like Roquan Smith. They've got to figure that out with Trenton Simpson. But edge rusher, I'll also throw this one out there though, Nestor. When you look at the overall makeup of their defensive line, Matabike signed long term, okay? So put him aside. Travis Jones entering a contract year. when he's healthy, he's looked really, really good. So are you going to commit to him? Or are you going to let that play out? Broderick Washington, that extension he signed a couple years ago, that's been underwhelming. He's not making a ton of money. I'm not saying they're going to cut him. If they would, it would be more out of circumstance. But because of what I'm about to say, Michael Pierce, wrong side of 30. Brent Urban, wrong side of 30, and he's a free agent. I think when you look at their defensive line with some of their depth guys are getting a little long in the tooth. I think you look at what the Philadelphia Eagles just did with absolutely wreaking havoc with a front four where they did not have to blitz. I think the Ravens, if you're looking at kind of taking the next step, right? And look, this team's been excellent in the regular season year after year after year as long as number 8 is healthy. So it's not about that. But if you're looking at the next step in other ways that they can try to break through in January, I think you have to look at the pass rush and recognize whether it's another interior guy or the edge spot, because Van Noy is going to be a year older and always in a contract year. And you've got nothing from David Ajabo. And Adisa Isaac was hurt all last year, so you have no idea what you really have with him. I think you look at defensive line in trying to, whether it's an edge guy or whether it's another guy that you can kind of move around, a 5 technique guy that maybe replaces Brent Urban but has more upside in terms of the rotation. I
They've
think that's
always
where they need to
plugged in
look.
with a Zadarius Smith kind of guy here. Bring Matt
Yeah,
Judon back, or that's how they usually address this, dude.
it,
They
it
don't usually
typically
address it with a
is.
first round draft pick,
Yeah,
and maybe this is the year they will.
and
But
that's and
yeah,
right, and that's where I kind of feel, they need a dude there. They haven't had a dude as an edge rusher in a really long. I mean, you have to go back to Suggs and Doomerville a decade ago, right? And even those guys at that point, they were on the back nine of their career
well,
at that
that's my
point.
point. They've
Yeah,
almost always had a back nine guy
yeah.
other than
So,
Suggs,
and look,
and maybe Judon as he came on became was a
yeah,
guy.
but and I'm not saying that they're doomed if they don't do that. Let's be clear. To your point, they've made that work. They've schemed up pressure. They've used sim pressures and blitzes and all the different things that they do. And they've still had a really good defense
I see
overall.
them signing their own
But
Andrew Kittredge in this position.
yeah,
Like
maybe,
just getting
yeah,
a guy.
kind of
That's
what they
what they
do.
do, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it might be, or because, and I haven't taken a deep, deep, deep dive into the draft at this point. The combine is when things really start to pick up and we'll have workout days and all that. But, it does seem to be the kind of draft that people think that there's a nice group of edge rushers here. So maybe they find that guy. And again, part of the complication of that is Van Noy's age and Owe entering the last year of his contract. He's got the 5th-year option that he's going to be playing on. Are you ready to marry Odafe Owe long term, right? Or do you say, I don't know, we might view him in the way that we viewed Matt Judon 4 or 5 years ago, which was we liked him enough to franchise tag him 1 year, but we didn't like him enough to give him that lucrative money that he ultimately got from the Patriots. So, we'll see. But I do think that that's another position where, and just that unit, that front four, is something where they could still take a look. And at the very least, I think they want to inject a little bit of young depth into that group, knowing that guys like Pierce and Brent Urban and Kyle Van Noy are all on the wrong side of 30, and you're not going to be able to count on guys like that to keep contributing year after year after year.
11 draft picks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they
Projected with the comp picks and 11 picks.
yeah. So I mean, talking about this guard or that corner, they're going to get players. They're going to bring in a cupboard. And then on top of that, to my point, they'll have players on the edge, 30-something replacement players that they could sign a guard, sign that maybe isn't Zeitler, but maybe they're happier with than what they have. But they're going to be hitting their nose on the cap, right? I mean, they're not cheapskates and they're shrewd about how they manage it, but they play to it,
Yeah.
and the Ronnie Stanley thing and whatever they're going to do, whether it's we're going to sign Kyle Hamilton now and give him money or, get out in front of things. I don't know, but they're really good at this. They're as good at this as they are at, covering up things in their own building.
uh, I'll say, when you look at where they are cap wise, they're tight against it. The cap's going up a little bit more than was anticipated, which is a good thing for those teams that are tight against the cap, although everyone's going to get more cap space. So I think sometimes we overrate that a little bit.
And they
but
know that. They're
yeah,
scientists about
they
this.
do.
They knew 2 years
But
ago when they gave Lamar the money that there would be a little bit, it wouldn't be 22% against the cap for his salary.
yeah,
It was going to be more like 16.
right.
They
But
measure all of that. Yeah.
yeah, so but for me, I look at a couple players right now in terms of, three players. I would say, because I touched on Owe, and I'm like, that one I'm just, I don't have a good feel for where they are with him in terms of whether they want to really marry him long term. But I look at three guys right now. Lamar Jackson has a $43 million cap hit for this year. Now, that, as it comes to just what star quarterbacks cost, that's not crazy, right? It goes up to 70 some million the next couple years. But the point is, we're getting close to that point where you can talk extension on him, right? And he's had back-to-back MVP caliber years. You feel fine about that. He's 28, he's not 33. He showed no signs of slowing down. So that's one way that you can open up some more cap space by extending him, lowering that number, right? Committing more dollars, but you're okay with that because it's Lamar Jackson. Marlon Humphrey's the other one. He's got a $25 million cap number. Got a couple more years left on his deal. You know, I don't know if you're not going to tack 5 or 6. It's not going to be a crazy long deal, but the way he played, you can extend him. You can lower that cap number. And I think the other one is Derrick Henry, right? I mean, Derrick Henry, when you look at what his cap number is projected to be, it's 12.9 million, $6 million base salary. There's a couple bonuses in there. This was the kind of deal that was basically a 1 year deal with the second year being an option. They clearly want to keep him. So can you work something out that tacks another year or two on for someone who played so well this past year, who is older? So you don't want to give him a Saquon Barkley deal either, but you can give him a little bit more, tack it on a little bit more. But in the process of doing that, you lower his cap number $5 million, $6 million. I mean, that's a way to create some cap space there.
I'll say one more thing about the organization that's a positive thing. Nobody ever wants out of here in that way. I mean, maybe Hollywood Brown because of the offense or whatever. But, they have guys that are going to be very amenable to sticking around and feel like they have something to prove here, for sure.
I will say this. Marcus Williams, look, that didn't work out at all, right? We all know that. How amenable was he, though, to being benched and all that? He redid his deal at the end of last year to basically put the Ravens in a spot where they could save a bunch of cap space right now, knowing that they had to give him a post June 1st designation. He willingly took a pay cut. And part of this is he knew he was never going to get another dime from the Ravens after what happened this past year. But he was amenable. He was agreeable to saying, look, we'll change my contract. You guys can get cap savings. You're going to release me with a June 1st designation. I'm going to catch on elsewhere. It was one of those that just speaks to what you just said. Even in the process of being benched, he was willing to play ball with them to help them out from a cap standpoint, which, I don't want to.
It might be his agent, too. His agent wants to keep the peace, too.
But he works for the player, right? Ultimately, agents work for the player. So, but there's an example right there of what you just said.
But the agent also saying, and I talked to Chad about this, Chad Wiesling, by the way, my agent buddy, just, hey, dude, I know you're pissed off and whatever, but I'm going to get you home to Green Bay. And in order to do this, just keep the peace.
Yeah.
They all know each other, right? Yeah,
right. I mean, and remember, there was even that weird, he was initially benched in that Cleveland game. It was uncomfortable, all that. And, now we don't know exactly what happened behind closed doors, but it was harmonious the rest of the year. It wasn't to the point where they had to cut him because he was a malcontent and guys hated him or anything like that. So, to your point that you were making, whatever else is going on with the organization in terms of Tucker and everything you talked about at the beginning of our conversation, the culture of players, the locker room, the kumbaya with the organization, all of that. Yeah. I mean, these guys like playing here and they win a lot of football games, even if not as many in January as people would like the last 6-7 years. But, we'll see how this plays out. But yeah, as we kind of went into the weeds a little bit on the salary cap, yeah, they're not going to have, we're not going to be seeing the Ravens make 3 or 4 big name signings. And we never do, right? I mean, we should know that by now in 3 decades of Ravens football.
Well, the good teams don't.
Yeah. I mean, you rarely are going to see the Ravens make a splash. And the times they have, a lot of them haven't worked out all that well. Earl Thomas comes to mind immediately.
He is Luke Jones. He's Baltimore Luke. We got baseball on the brain. We got a lot of spring training. We've done the ABS. We've done all of these things going on. We will continue to monitor all things the Underwear Olympics in Indianapolis. Luke will be out on social media. I have great guests around here this week. I mean, just unbelievable. Hank Azaria has been here this week talking about Bruce Springsteen and The Simpsons. We've also just had Pat Scarry from Towson came on. I did a whole media deep dive with Jim Williams, Lawrence Lanahan, and Boehner Woods. They wrote books together. They're here separately this week on different things. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with John Palumbo from Crack the Sky this week. And then next week, Rick Emmett from Triumph's going to preview the Blue Jays Orioles opener in Canada later next month. And this is big news for anybody on the Justin Tucker thing. Julie Sharper of the Baltimore Banner is going to join me for an hour later on this week. You'll want to find all of that out at WNST. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.